There might be only one thing more alarming than what has become a near medieval siege on our country's tradition of respect for the rule of law. And it's the fact that many Americans, regrettably but understandably, have, after all these years of Trump and his allies attacking it, grown numb to it or view it as a new norm. Maybe it's an act of self-preservation for some. Maybe it's easier to just tune it all out when Trump or one of his allies in Congress or a voice on conservative media spits out such venom toward the men and women of DOJ or the FBI. But the temptation to register the lies being told about the justice system, about the FBI, simply as white noise or politics as usual, in our view, represents as grave a threat to democracy as the lies being told themselves. As an example, consider what the disgraced convicted ex-president told the crowd in Racine, Wisconsin on Tuesday.
The outrageous charges in New York were a corrupt creation of crooked Joe Biden and his group. And they really weaponized, what they did is they weaponized the Department of Justice. They weaponized all the White House.
No, they didn't. Trump committed a crime, and the people who helped him do so, some of them went to jail, some of them received immunity. They testified, and a jury of his peers convicted him. He was held accountable by a local prosecutor who worked completely independently of the Department of Justice. Full stop. But where you or I might just dismiss this as a campaign speech, MAGA disinfo, riling up the base, as just that, Trump supporters hear those words, accept them as fact, and with January 6th as an example, are open to acting violently. It's how Trump and his allies are today priming Trump supporters for what will be nothing less than a hostile takeover of the Department of Justice should Trump prevail in November, turning around the very instruments used to keep Trump in check into political weapons. And don't take our word for it. They're saying it out loud. Trump ally, fellow convict Steve Bannon, has been open about the plan to prosecute high-ranking DOJ officials, people like Attorney General Merrick Garland, out of what he describes as, quote, retribution. Of course, when it comes to unfounded attacks against the people serving at the top of the Department of Justice, Steve Bannon's warmongering is more like Chapter 10 in a years-long saga on this front. One could easily argue that Chapter 1 started during the Obama presidency. If you've never heard or you forgot what Fast and Furious is outside of the context of a major motion picture franchise, then you successfully avoided or forgot about that period in American history. To jog your memory, Operation Fast and Furious was an ill-fated gun tracing program related to dangerous Mexican drug cartels. The operation went wrong when a U.S. Border Patrol agent was tragically killed. 2 guns from the operation were found at the scene. Attorney General at the time, Eric Holder, provided lawmakers with thousands of pages of documents, only to become the first ever sitting cabinet official in our country's history to ever be held in contempt of Congress. Then, a 19-month DOJ IG investigation found zero evidence that AG Holder or any of DOJ's top leaders knew of or sought to cover up the depth of the scandal. But the damage had been done. The train had left the station, as they say. A concerted breakdown of trust between conservatives, right-wing media, and our institutions, especially the Department of Justice, was set in motion. The end result, all these years later, a convicted felon, presumptive Republican Party nominee, running openly on going to war with the Department of Justice on day one if he prevails in November. It is through this wider lens, this longer view of modern political history, that we examine Trump's near daily and escalating attacks on the rule of law with our next guest. Joining our conversation, former Attorney General Eric Holder is here. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thanks for having me, Nicole. I didn't want to necessarily review Fast and Furious, but that's probably a good place to start this conversation.
Well, and I went back and read about it myself. I've never said this on TV, but I first read in when I had written a novel, and Chris Wallace was a friend of mine. He invited me to come on the program as a panelist to mention the book. And he said, we're talking about Fast and Furious. And I said, what's that? He said, oh, read in. Our audience is really fired up about it. And I remember Googling and reading it. And it's as good an example as any of the injection of politics pulling the levers of congressional allies to do something that had never been done before, and then softening the terrain with conservative media and conservative activists. And I wonder what you make of what Trump's promising to do in a second term to the department that you once led.
Yeah, to a department that I once led and that I love dearly. I spent nearly 20 years of my career at the Justice Department, starting off as just a line lawyer in the Justice Department, coming out straight out of law school. And there's a tradition in the department that regardless of who is in charge politically, the department uses its power in an apolitical way. And I'm very concerned about what the former president says he's going to do. Steve Bannon says what he's going to do. And I take them at their word. And I think they've learned from the first term. They will appoint a compliant attorney general. But beyond that, they now understand that they will have a compliant deputy attorney general. They will have compliant United States attorneys, and they will give these compliant U.S. attorneys hiring power so they can appoint compliant assistant United States attorneys. And they will do the things that they have said that they're going to do. Open investigations against political opponents, use the law in ways that is inconsistent with the neutral way in which the Justice Department is supposed to operate. This is something that should be, I think, a prime campaign issue. We're talking about the rule of law in this country, which really serves as the basis, the foundation for all that we hold near and dear in America.
It is the area where Trump's current advisors have spent the most time and energy on the architecture of dismantling and reassembling as a political weapon. And one of the things I know from my time in government is that other than the military, the people like yourself who've served in the Department of Justice have zero appetite for politics. And I agree with you. This should be a first, second, third issue for the voters. But how do you sort of bridge that gap between a department where the very essence of pushing back against Trumpism is to not be political, but the most effective way to reject what Trump wants to do to the department is a political solution of not voting for him? How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, I don't think there necessarily is a gap. I mean, to say that, you're for a neutral Justice Department, that you are for democracy, that you are for the rule of law, those to me seem to be, apolitical things that can be injected into the political sphere to say, well, we have one candidate who will stand for those non-political, apolitical, pro-democracy measures. And we have on the other side a candidate who is bound and determined to subvert the system to his will, subvert the system so that his supporters and himself as well are not subject to the rules in the way that other American citizens are. I think that, people who oppose the former president have got to really kind of get over it. And understand the battlefield on which we are now operating, the terrain on which we are now operating. The normal rules in a lot of ways simply don't apply. And it means that we're going to have to be more upfront. We're going to have to be more forceful. Doesn't mean that we have to, duplicate that which they say they're going to do or use the tactics that they're going to use. But I think being just, as I said, more forceful, more open about what the dangers are. Fear is a big motivator. In 2008, Barack Obama used hope and change as a thing that galvanized huge numbers of people. I think that fear used appropriately is something that can be employed here, because the fear is of losing our democracy. The fear is of losing our freedoms. The fear is losing our ability, women's ability to make reproductive decisions. That's a fear that I think should be legitimately used by those who oppose the former president. He's certainly using fear, illegitimate fears to try to galvanize his supporters.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think that is the frame around which the campaign must be waged, right? I mean, we can, and I think Liz Cheney articulates this. We can go back to having policy fights after the threat of Trump, and the fear of what he'd do to our democracy has abated. I wonder where you would sort of put all of the revelations. I mean, the thing that is different this time around, we were so dependent on investigative journalists in 2016 to break stories about Trump's trespasses and norm busting. It's now all on a website. I mean, it's all spilling out of his mouth somewhat incoherently. How do you break through to people who aren't paying attention? or look at it as, wow, both sides do it? You know, how do you sort of jolt people into understanding the threat that he poses to our democracy?
Well, you know, I think that we have to use tangible examples. And it means that if it doesn't break through the first time you say it, or the second time, or the third time, you say it a fourth time. And tangible examples, and make people in the most digestible way possible familiar with what the charges are in the pending cases, make people familiar with what the results were of the case that was ultimately tried in New York City. When it comes to, you know, reproductive rights, as you've done on this show, I think very compellingly, have women come on and tell their stories. Have people come on and talk about how it's more difficult to vote in certain parts of the country. You know, again, having real people talk about how the things that they have done and will do will have an impact on their lives. Contextualize this in a way that makes it real for the American voter.